Hello, everyone. Good afternoon to everyone who's joined. My name is Dr. Sahar Youssef. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist and faculty member at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, and I'll be kicking off the session today. I'm actually going to go ahead and start up the presentation here. I'm going to kick us off by addressing something that I think is near and dear to all of our hearts over a year now into COVID, and that is the topic of burnout. So I wanted to share with you all some new research, some coming out of my lab and some from labs all around the world, specifically on the topic of burnout, what has been leading to it, a little bit on the history of burnout, and then leaving you all with a self-assessment that you can take that my lab is making available to everyone at Wild. So really excited about that. And specifically, I wanted to talk about managing stress and designing cognitive associations as it relates to burnout. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, today we are in fact a year into COVID. What does that really mean for all of us? And it's one thing to talk about stress and burnout in the early days last year, but now we've all kind of gotten used to it. So what's really changed and what has been the downstream effects of COVID really? Well, the number one question on most folks' minds, especially executives running large teams, departments, and companies is, were people productive? Can people continue to maintain their productivity under such extreme circumstances? Well, according to multiple studies, but one that I wanted to share with you all on over 12,000 folks, study run by BCG, was able to show that the majority of people have in fact either been able to maintain or even increase their productivity during COVID. So this was something that we did not anticipate, but absolutely is a positive for sure. So people are maintaining or increasing their productivity, but then the question becomes, at what cost? Work days have in fact expanded. Work days are now 10 to 20% longer. Multiple studies, not only from Microsoft Teams, but also Slack, and some research from my own lab has been able to show that folks are spending more time in the early mornings, in the late evenings, and on the weekends in Teams, in Microsoft Teams, in email, for example, because there is no commute. There's no barrier to just jumping on and checking things earlier in the day over breakfast or later in the evening, before, during, after dinner, etc. There's a huge spike, especially on the weekends, because we're not doing much else. When we see a maintenance or an increase in productivity, and then on the other hand, we see the workday expanding. So people are working more hours. Of course, we can't see these two pieces of data without talking about burnout. Burnout numbers are reaching a tipping point. In fact, 75% of workers have experienced burnout symptoms this year, which is up from 20% in early May. Now, the reasons cited make it rather unique. The reasons cited are, number one, no separation between work and home life. That is, according to some research, the number one reason. According to others, the second cited reason for increased burnout. This kind of burnout, this is what is making COVID unique. We see burnout numbers rise and fall historically. We see them rise and fall with economic downturns, with 2 bad quarters in a row, when we see industry shifts happening within our companies, and we see them go up, but we typically see burnout actually decrease, typically around the holidays, because for better or worse, you have no choice but to take some time off, to spend time with loved ones, to catch up on sleep, etc. Even when we're harried and have a bunch of deadlines that pile up, typically speaking, around the holidays, we see a decrease in burnout. So folks will come back in January, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to go and tackle the new year, even if it means burnout continuing to increase again starting January. This has not been the case during COVID, because of this number one reason cited. No separation between work and home life. The lines have been blurring, and it's not anyone's fault. And it's because of this that we're seeing a huge part of the burnout. Now, despite burnout, the majority, 59%, are actually taking off less time than they normally would. And 42% of those who are still working from home, which is not everybody. I was on campus for the first time since March today, which was very, very exciting. I got to teach inside of a building, which was, and of course, everyone was still remote and dialing in, but it was still exciting to be somewhere and walking around and not on a Zoom call, sitting in my normal spot. But 42% of those still working from home are actually not planning on taking any time off to decompress. So we need to start talking about what to do and why this is the case. We have at least 3 more months left, if not longer. Productivity is projected to plummet in the rest of 2021 because of the increase in burnout symptoms and because folks are not doing anything or planning on doing anything serious to deal with the burnout that they're experiencing. Now, Berkeley is actually home to the history of burnout. Dr. Christina Maslach, who is a professor emeritus at Cal, made burnout famous in the 1970s. And I've had coffee with her multiple times, and we discussed the history of burnout, and she shared with me what it was like being a female faculty member and researcher back in the 70s, and really discovering and pioneering this kind of work that was poo-pooed in the very beginning. When it was first coming out. And she began studying burnout, looking at healthcare specifically. It has now since expanded. As of 2019, burnout is now officially recognized as a disease by the World Health Organization. It is no longer considered stress symptoms experienced by those in healthcare, nurses, doctors, service workers, etc. We're now seeing that burnout is now being experienced by everyone, from engineers at a tech company all the way to executives within sales and marketing. It is, we all have we're all capable of experiencing burnout. And it's not about the number of hours. Okay, I'm going to repeat that again. It is not about the number of hours. Burnout is not just working too hard or too long. I think every single leader in this room has had an experience of working too hard and too long, myself included. But we bounce back from it, don't we? We bounce back from it. We take a long weekend. We sleep in on Saturday and Sunday, and we come back Monday ready to go again. We have a really crappy 2-3 weeks, and we also still bounce back from it. Burnout is not about a deadline. Burnout is not about being frustrated. It's not about working harder too long. It's a mixture of chronic stress plus a unique concoction of high job demands, low control. I'm going to be harping on this one quite a bit, and an effort-reward imbalance. Okay, so we're going to be diving into this quite a bit in not only the breakout session, but a little bit in today's quick little keynote. Top factors fueling burnout, according to workers. My lab helped conduct a very large study on over 13,000 knowledge workers from around the world, specifically looking at burnout symptoms. This is in the Asana's Anatomy of Work Index, which we're happy to share with you all after this. 3 reasons why workers have been experiencing burnout. The number one is being overworked. And I'm going to dive into each one of these and just provide a little bit of data behind each one. Being overworked. We cannot typically move the needle on how much work we in fact have. There's very little we can do about actual job demand. If we wanted to do something there, we'd have to sit down with the CEO and all of the board members of all of our companies and change long-term goals and the long-term trajectory of the company, or perhaps increase headcount by a large margin. Those are not easy fixes. What we can do around being overworked is deal with the perception and the feelings of being overworked. We've all had this experience before. There can be 2 different individuals who have the exact same amount of work, but one perceives it as being fine and the other perceives it as being stressful, as being demanding, and feeling burned out. So we can, in fact, play around with how we feel and the perception of this. The first piece I wanted to dive into on this topic is actually adjusting our video meetings. I wanted to demystify something, and that is that video fatigue, video conferencing fatigue is real. Microsoft launched a study in 2020 actually looking at brainwaves, actually using electroencephalography or EEG to look at what's going on in the human brain when we're on video conferencing calls versus in-person meetings. Things that are different. We see a very quick increase in what are called beta waves. Beta waves are an indicator of alertness and attention. We see this in normal meetings, normal face-to-face meetings as well. But just as a reference point, normal meetings, like in-person meetings, typically we see beta waves hovering around this line. With video meetings, we see beta waves shooting up very rapidly and continuing to increase until about the 30-40 minute mark. And as you can see, once we hit about the 30-40 minute mark, excess stress kicks in, and then we start to see a nosedive in energy. We start to see a nosedive in beta waves. And we see an increase in alpha waves, which are a marker of restfulness or fatigue. What does this really mean? What's the take home? We are not getting as much out of ourselves. We are not getting as much out of our people as we think we are past the 30-minute mark in video meetings. My new slogan for my lab, and I'm encouraging everyone else to adopt this as well, and I will send you all this infographic. Our lab actually made this to make it as cute as possible, to share this with your teams and your colleagues. 30 is the new 60. Thank goodness this is not about age. Otherwise, 60 is the new 30, just in case anyone needs to know for reference. But 30 is the new 60 when it comes to video meetings and virtual meetings. We are not getting as much out of ourselves and our people past the 30 or 40-minute mark. Shorten what can be shortened. One-on-ones, status updates, etc. If you can talk to your team about this, share this information with them, educate them. Say, I just heard this, this talk, and I looked into this research. This is what's happening. This is why we're so exhausted. Let's see if we can take the 60-minute meeting and actually shorten it to 30, and let's see if we can just get it done. Let's keep the agenda nice and tight, and let's see if we can get it done in 30. And if we can't, let's take a break and then see if we need to do another one. We can always schedule another one. So 30 is the new 60. This is a huge part of what is causing the immense fatigue, that blurred feeling that we have at the end of the day, that Zoom fatigue, that video conferencing fatigue that we're having. It's because we continue to have these hour-long meetings and we're exhausting ourselves neurologically. Now, on the topic of, again, perception of workload, perception of work demand, there is a large difference between what we consider to be controllable stress and uncontrollable stress for human beings, and actually most mammals. Human beings love feeling in control. Decades of research has shown that when we're exposed to stress that we feel we have no control over, we feel like the stress is being put upon us. We feel like either pain or, in our case, in the 21st century for knowledge workers, the work is being put upon us. We're being delegated to. We are not in control of our day. We are not in control of our week. Everything is just being thrown at us. That individual that feels that lack of control is at least 2 times as likely to experience burnout than an individual that has the exact same amount of work that feels in control. I'm going to be talking about ways in which we can manufacture control, even when we are actually lacking in quite a bit of control during our day. How do we manufacture control? We will get to that not only in the breakout, I'll be deep diving into that later, but I'll get to it in just a moment. Top factors feeling burnout. Number 2, not being able to switch off and disconnect from work. Productivity when we're working from home relies heavily on having some sort of dedicated space. Steelcase and Leisman actually launched a study earlier on 126,000 knowledge workers. And as you can see here, satisfaction when working from home is highest when we have a dedicated private office. Then it goes down one rung, a dedicated work area, but not a separate room, and a non-work specific home location like the dining table, the kitchen table, the couch is going to be the least satisfaction and the least productivity. Our homes are at odds with getting into a work state of mind. Unless you have a long history of working from home and you have a fully established at-home office where you do nothing else in that room but work, so you don't allow your home life to leak into that room and you do not allow your work to ever leak outside into the rest of your home. For most of us, we've been working sort of flex. So everything has been blurring together. There doesn't seem to be a clear divide between work and personal. The reason why is because of the way the brain works. Every morning when you wake up, your brain is looking around the room at all of the stimuli around it, all of the environmental cues, and it's asking itself what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior in this location? What is expected and unexpected behavior in this location? For most of us, our homes are heavily associated with rest, sleep, relaxation, time spent with loved ones, binge watching Netflix on the couch, board games, cooking, cleaning, etc. Not getting into a focused or productive headspace, not thinking strategically for work. Our homes are at odds with what we do when we're typically back in the office. So what can we do? We can design our cognitive associations. The ideal, as I mentioned before, is to have a dedicated workspace in a separate or private area. But if you're short on space, little things you can do is actually switch rooms with your kids if you do have children. So allowing them to do their schoolwork in your bedroom and you actually take your calls from their bedroom, because their bedroom is not associated with your sleep and your relaxation and mental health. And your bedroom is not associated with their sleep or relaxation, because our kids are susceptible to this as well. So why not switch rooms? so that their rooms continue to be dedicated 100% to their play, their relaxation, their imagination, and their sleep, and they work somewhere else. Okay, so you can switch rooms with somebody else. If you're really short on space, what you can do is introduce a physical or sensory trigger into your workspace to enter work mode, so to speak. I mentioned this before to this group, but for those who weren't with us the last time I talked about this, little basic things that you can do. Covering your kitchen table, your dining room table with a tablecloth when it's work hours, so that when your brain sees that color, it sees that tablecloth, it knows that this is the office, and then you put that tablecloth away, out of sight, out of mind, when you want to get your dining room table back. Okay, you have to keep these associations really clean and clear. Having a focus candle, for example, that you ritualistically light. Let me share mine right here for a second. I always have one of these. When it's time for me to do focused work, I light my focus candle. I put it right next to my computer. And this has become heavily associated with when I need to work. The smell of it, the sight of it, etc., and the ritual of lighting it. And I make sure that when I'm done and I'm leaving my office area, I put all of these candles away, out of sight, out of mind. I do not light these candles in the evenings or the weekends. Another thing that you can do is music. That's why it's highlighted here, the Spotify logo. What's beautiful about music is that it's portable. I've been listening to the same playlists for almost 10 years now. When I want to do analytical work, I have the same playlist that I've been listening to. Not always on Spotify. This predates Spotify, but I've now ported them over to Spotify. But I've been listening to the same albums and the same playlists, and it's portable. So when I'm back in the office or if I'm at home, I can listen to that music to trigger my brain into an on state of focus. And then I have trigger songs that trigger me to an off state, so that I can make sure that I ramp down from work and I can get my headspace back for my personal life. I have a ritual that marks the end of my workday as well. Now, the last factor fueling burnout is a lack of clarity on tasks and roles. Lack of clarity on tasks and roles. Adam Karen, who's the head of product marketing over at Stripe, who's an old student of mine, actually has a ritual of setting daily what are called MITs. And this is from the class that I teach at Haas. MITs stand for most important tasks. They go through this daily ritual of making sure that, especially if they're remote, that everyone gets on the same page, regardless of time zone, no matter where you are. Every morning, whenever it is that you start your day, everyone on his team gets into teams and they say what their MITs are for the day. No more than 3 a day. What are those big things that you're going to accomplish today? They call them in his Teams channel rocks, which is why we have Dwayne The Rock Johnson featured over here off to the side. They go through this ritual every single day to stay focused on what matters and feel like they can actually turn off at the end of the day. Why is this related to burnout? I'm not talking about, this is of course helpful for prioritization and alignment with a team. And it increases some motivation and energy at the start of the day for sure. This is actually more related to burnout than anything else. And the reason why is because you are scoping out what success looks like for the day. Instead of looking at the laundry list of activities that you need to finish on any given day, which we all know never gets done. The entire to-do list never gets done on any given day. We end up rolling it over to the next day and the next day and the next day. That never feels good. We need to game our work environment. We need to game our work systems for dopamine, for reward chemicals. So we feel good, we feel motivated, we feel energized, and we feel like the work we're doing actually has an outcome and a work outcome and a work product. So scope out what success looks like for the day. Look at how many meetings you have and ask yourself, well, okay, it looks like I've only realistically have 2 hours of focused work time outside of my meetings. What can you really get done in 2 hours? Pull from the to-do list and write it down on a separate piece of paper. Write down what you can actually realistically accomplish that day. That is a most important task. If you finish those items at the end of the day, when you turn off, look at that list again and say, I did X, I did Y. I did a good job. Give yourself a pat on the back and move on. Throw that piece of paper away and you start a new piece of paper the next day. This is why this is related to burnout. All right, and on that note, I will end here. And if you want to learn more about burnout, I'm going to be deep diving into some of these other factors, especially related to control, feelings of control, and manufacturing control. Join me in the breakout session later. If you do have personal questions that we can't get to or you can't join the breakout, you're more than welcome to email me at susef@berkeley.edu. And we have a special code for everyone at Wild to get access to our lab's free burnout risk index for you all personally. I ask that you all don't distribute it widely, but for everyone that's joining us on the call and in the Wild community, this is for you all, each and every one of you, to be able to assess yourselves and to figure out where you fall on the burnout scale. you can go to becomingsuperhuman.science/resources and get access to that, and just use the code WILD to be able to take that burnout index. And I will be yelled at by my lab if I do not mention that our lab just recently got an Instagram. So if you do have an Instagram, give us a follow at Becoming Superhuman Lab. That is the handle. And with that, I will hand it off to Kelly.
Sahar, wow. Thank you so much for this fabulous wake-up session. You're just so unbelievably energizing to us, and I hope everybody is now plugging in to your Instagram. We just learn so much from your talks every time. This has been your third. What a privilege to know you. What a privilege to know you. So welcome everybody. My name is Kelly Close, and thank you so much for joining us today for our third Quarterly Wild event. And we hope that in the midst of everything that continues to go on with our pandemic, with this global health tragedy, that you're staying as safe and sane as possible. So I founded Close Concerns and co-founded the Diatribe Foundation and DQ&A to make people smarter about diabetes and to improve the outcomes of patients everywhere. Long-term outcomes, short-term outcomes. Now we've been talking more about system outcomes. Our family of organizations reaches over 10,000 leaders and their teams working in and around diabetes virtually every day, and nearly 250,000 patients every week. That's straight from Diatribe. If you haven't signed up for the Diatribe newsletter, that's diatribe.org/join. DQ&A surveys thousands of patients and healthcare providers every quarter, along with multiple payers. So, looking back on the work that began nearly 20 years ago now, I'm so grateful for the relationships that I've been able to build with so many people, so many women, including so many of you here. I've cultivated friendships and partnerships with leaders and team members throughout the field. So many of you would be here today means a big deal. It just means so much to me. I was thinking it was about 17 years ago today, an amazing group of women from TheraSense, our first client at Close Concerns, threw me a baby shower, bought John and me a stroller. We had no idea what we were doing. And our middle child, we used it with her and with Valentina, our youngest. Valentina was going to be a teenager this month. So you guys, so many of you have built so much with me, including our family, and particularly helped build our incredible teams of associates and made it possible. So I rooted my career in business just really in the idea of shared knowledge between brilliant and talented people. I'm lucky to have this calling. I'm so fortunate that I have a calling, so fortunate that all of you are working in yours. Our organizations are really powered by young people. Some of our alums are even back today, and I'll be with our current organization at Close Concerns in a breakout group later today. And I've had diabetes almost 35 years. And to think of how much I've learned from everybody here, I used to say I've had diabetes almost 15 years, almost 20 years, almost 25 years, almost 30 years. Everything that we have been able to do together, the knowledge that you have brought me and that I have been able to share among you means the world to me. In the beginning, I feel like we were all working, especially from Close Concerns, on what could happen for patients individually, even in the midst of, many of you were working on that as well as more on populations. And we know that at Close Concerns, we want to help work more and more on populations. And we see WILD as a critical part of that, just the population of women, advancing women leaders, and advancing women leaders of color in particular. So just as what all of us with diabetes have in common is a diagnosis, however, we all have in common a diagnosis as patients. There isn't any singular experience for women in business, women in research, women in policy. And 2020, what a year. And so I salute you and your teams for working through this global health crisis in and around it every single day to the best of your abilities. And you guys have in diabetes, you have this real commitment to excellence. And I'm so grateful for it. And now I want to see even more of a commitment for you to have for yourselves to grow with each other and advance all of your levels of leadership. We have a bunch of specific ideas for this goal. What could women in around diabetes do even better than other therapeutic areas? How can we challenge each other? And how can we work even more cohesively and have even more common narratives? So beyond changing our sense of community, the COVID-19 pandemic has obviously brought great hardships to so many patients, so many workers. We all know it. It's rising unemployment rates that are astronomical, especially for people with diabetes. You know, so much of what has happened, it's heartbreaking, it's wrong, it's unnecessary, and it is preventable. The pandemic has exposed so many inequities, health outcomes from COVID-19 and people of color, people with diabetes and prediabetes, people with poverty are showing up in just disproportionate worse ways than they have in the past. Jobs have disappeared due to the pandemic or changed for the worse. And women can help change this. Women disproportionately can help change this, especially because we all work in an area that can be dramatically improved. At our last event, Wild number 2, Stacey Petrovic, Insulet's CEO, characterized 2020 as a year of opportunities cloaked as crises. I know that really resonated with us as we heard her say this. She couldn't be more right. The tragedies have ignited many ways for us to advance women leaders. I know you know that only 24% of Fortune 500 healthcare company board directors are women. If you come to Wild before, I know you know only 2.5% of board members are women of color. Healthcare is the lowest performing field in representation. There's never been a more important time to rethink in healthcare the way we do things and to think how we can work particularly hard and particularly intelligently, probably rather than just hard on this. So in a couple of minutes, we're going to hear from Penn's renowned Dr. Stephanie Creary on how we can all take steps toward using the power that we have. And it is power that is expanding, but using the power that we have, how do you want to use it? How do we want to look back at this? We can use it to elevate diversity, equity, and inclusion in our works and lives. She's going to tell us how to really think about it. Then we're going to move to self-select breakout rooms, and networking starts at 6 p.m. That's on the East Coast, 3 p.m. out here on the West Coast, where there are going to be incredible opportunities to be in community with Sahar, with Dr. Creary, with Dr. Fran Kaufman, and with our Close Concerns team. And we will be listening to what the leaders are saying at the beginnings of the sessions and sharing those out. As always, the breakout rooms themselves are private and won't be filmed. As a community, we at Wild really want to help female leaders reach their fuller potential. We previously heard from incredible speakers, including the ADA's CEO, Tracy Brown, leadership guru, Nancy Kane of Harvard, health policy expert, Mark Helson, along with J&J's Jane Addams, even an expert on business and humor, the renowned Jennifer Aker from Stanford. In past events, we've delved into how is it to be a woman on a board of directors. We've learned in leaps and bounds from former Medtronic exec Martha Goldberg Aronson, who's now on the board of Beta Bionics. We participated in skill building sessions on productivity, heard from Sahar multiple times now. So if you're interested in seeing those recordings, you can do so. You can help us spread the gospel of Wild. That's at our website, closeconcerns.com/wild. Today, we get to build on what we started at those first 2 Wild gatherings. And it's really because of the amazing, member organizations that have really stepped up that leads us to be able to do that. So thank you to Abbott Diabetes Care, Michael Johnson in particular, with Katie Spade, as well as tremendous leaders at Novo Nordisk and Insulet, especially Stacey and Trang Lai. So here at home at Close Concerns, we just want to say thank you so much to Karen Irwin and Kira Long. They're unbeatable, along with multiple others who have pitched in from DQ&A. You'll see the survey at the end of the session today, throughout the entire associate team at Close Concerns. And to all of you, we had at last glance over 150 directors, VPs, women in the C-suite, senior execs involved in this community. Couldn't be more grateful. You inspire me every day, and I know that you can elevate each other so that women working in and around diabetes have even more leaders in the C-suite who are execs, emerging leaders, and on public boards of directors. So I know you know we have a powerhouse lineup for you today. First, we get to hear from Dr. Creary in her keynote. She is going to show us again how to elevate DEI in our organizations, and I mean really elevate. After her presentation, we're so eager to dive into a Q&A session with her, moderated by Abbott's powerhouse leader, pupil leader of diversity and inclusion, Michael Johnson. And Michael is someone who many of you know could lead his own talk. This is way beyond a mission for him. Following their conversation, we'll have our own breakout sessions multiple ones where we're going to dive into focus topics that you'll hear more about. And with that, I'm really honored to introduce you all formally to the keynote speaker of our Spring 2021 Wild Gathering, Professor Stephanie Creary. When we first talked to Professor Creary, she used a really powerful phrase. She talked about having allies against racism and sexism, and then she talked about co-conspirators in this fight. And that's what a provocative term I've been using at every turn of late. She's a professor of management at Wharton who's built her expertise partly around the field called boundary management, especially when thinking about inclusion as well as intersectional identities that come from multiple social categories, race, sex, gender identity, just to name a few. By looking at the organizational reasons behind management problems, Dr. Creary has worked to identify workplace practices that help address these issues, from diversity policies and C-suite leadership strategies to mid-level manager practices. In addition to her role as identity and diversity scholar and field researcher, she's also founding faculty member of the Wharton Ideas Lab, which stands for Identity, Diversity, Engagement, Action, and Social Relationships. This is big. We're lucky to have her as part of our wild community. I'm a big watcher of her podcast. We'll send out links to that later. So Professor Creary, thank you so much for being here, for saying yes to us, for all the phenomenal work you are doing and leading every day. I'll hand it over to you now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for being here today. Thank you so much, Kelly, for your introduction and to all that have done such truly remarkable work to bring together today's event. So I do have slides because sort of that brings out the professor in me. Where would I be unless I actually had something for you to look at other than myself? So hopefully you find this helpful to you as I sort of share with you what are some thoughts that, while I wrote them up, I would say in 2020, they do come from about 15 years worth of research, both applied and academic, on the topic of understanding what works or what should we be doing to make sure that what we are trying to accomplish works with respect to diversity, equity, inclusion practices in organizations. And so let me just help situate us in the current context and help you to understand why there is what I would refer to as widespread interest in DEI right now, which is perhaps unlike many times in our recent lives. And so I would say that there are four instances or four illustrative examples of widespread interest. And I wouldn't say that they're entirely independent of one another, but they are definitely four facts that you can look to. The first is that increasingly and more recently, that investors and regulators and people who've largely been sitting on the sidelines have become increasingly interested in the topic of DEI. But I mean people sitting on the sidelines. I'm actually talking about companies that for some time have been aware that there were diversity, equity, inclusion issues in the world, but may not have been as motivated to look at those issues within their own organization. So we've seen some of these sideliner companies beginning to join the conversation. There has been an interest in revisiting the social contract as a confluence of a number of events over the past year. Certainly COVID has invited companies to think more about the humanity within their organizations, and certainly the murder of multiple Black Americans, including George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, among others, in the past 5, 6, 10 years, has made us start to think a little bit more specifically as leaders is, what is our role in this broader conversation around social justice and social change? And certainly as we've seen this idea of Black Lives Matter, this movement becoming embraced, not just here in the US, but around the world, it's helped us to understand that these issues of diversity, equity, inclusion are not bounded by geography, but certainly in our increasingly interconnected and global world becomes something that affects all of us. And again, with this idea that global relevance of DEI is something that continues to be increasingly important. Yes, Black Lives Matter is an example of that, but also the World Economic Forum, which has largely been a body of people who've been interested in a number of societal issues, has put at the forefront of its agenda issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and broader issues, including race, where in the past, much of what they introduced or were concerned with was primarily about issues of gender. So that's been an interesting evolution. And certainly now what we've seen recently is that the whole conversation of DEI is becoming part of and integrated with other conversations, with other social movements, if you will. And so one of these is a movement related to environment, social, and governance issues, and how companies, how leaders, and how investors think about the impacts of environmental, social, and governance issues on financial performance. And this idea that, that leaders need to be able to control for these potential impacts, particularly if they're negative, because they might also have financial implications. So that's been an interesting conversation that's evolved over the past 10 years. And we're starting to see DEI as being linked to this conversation, particularly with respect to the social issues that are being identified as being consequential to companies today. So as I talk to you about the importance and the value of elevating DEI work, I want to set up for you what is a very real tension that I've observed in my own research, but also many people who've been in DEI for a while as thought leaders and practitioners will tell you the same. There has been quite the focus on what we should do. And I think even in response to all the issues of inequity and justice that we've been wrestling with in the past few years, particularly in 2020, the first reaction that many leaders and employees had was, what do I do? What do we need to do? So there's this rush to activity. And a lot of that activity looks like the following: hiring chief diversity officers, creating diversity councils, creating employee resource groups, employee affinity groups, business resource groups, whatever they are called, but creating collectivities and creating roles wherein conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion can be formalized and processed has been a big set of activities that companies engage in when they're trying to really rush to do something. Also, diversity training, diversity recruiting, instituting a new mentoring and sponsorship program. I can actually add donating money to a lot of civil rights organizations and colleges and institutions designed to focus on underrepresented communities. That's another set of DEI work. And I'm not being exhaustive here, but I'm just letting you know there's a lot of work that people are doing in response to perceiving this gap. Whether it's a diversity gap, an inclusion gap, an equity gap, a respect gap, there's all of this work being done. But just because we're doing work doesn't mean that the people around us or we ourselves are actually valuing the work that's being done. And that's where I think I want to guide our conversation today. Is not about the doing of work, but how are we creating value for and how are we valuing the work that's being done so that people will continue to want to do it and feel that doing this work was actually fruitful. So I talk about these thoughts more. I've cited on the left of your screen here the article where I unpack some of this more in case you're trying to write notes furiously. But there's an article in Knowledge at Wharton where it's called How to Elevate Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Work in Your Organization. You're free to Google that. I believe they're sending out the link afterward if you miss anything today. So what is valuing DEI work? Valuing DEI work means that we do things that show that this is important. Adequate staffing for people who are doing the work, financial resources for people who are doing the work, giving people who are doing the work adequate power and authority to actually drive change processes, and ensuring that the employees at all levels are committed and engaged in doing the work, not just a privileged few and not just a diversity leader, but whoever wants to contribute to this conversation should have the capacity to actually contribute to this conversation if we truly value it. So I'm going to walk you through very quickly my merit framework for valuing DEI work. But let me tell you what I mean by merit and what is meant by merit before I walk you through that framework. So there's this objective notion of merit, and that is what many of us think about when we're talking about merit or meritocracy. We're in some respects acknowledging that we have some idea that if we're trying to be fair, then we should be distributing rewards based on the effort, the work that people are putting in, and that the rewards and the efforts, if they're going to be aligned in any way, need to be similar across groups in order for this system to be fair. There's also this idea that we're assuming that we could actually codify, so we can in a concrete way identify what people's efforts are and what the rewards should be, and that those can be systematically evaluated across groups. So this idea that we feel like this might be a tangible practice. Well, then what I'm going to do here for you, for those of you who believe that merit is an objective thing, is rock your world a little bit just to tell you that merit is actually very subjective. And when we look at academic research on this topic, we've seen how managers, leaders, and individuals apply this notion of merit very differently based on their own understandings, individual understandings of merit. Now, if we think about the current context that I'm walking you into, the merits of DEI work, we do not all evaluate the merits of DEI work in the same way. We have different opinions, we hold it to different standards, we establish different criteria based on our own understanding of what's important. So there is a lot of subjectivity, period, to this notion of merit in organizations, and a lot of subjectivity to how we evaluate the notion of merit when it comes to DEI work specifically. So we're going to walk through a framework, which I've called merit, with the intention of acknowledging not just the objective idea of merit, but also how we subjectively begin to make DEI work feel more merit-worthy throughout our organizations. And so let me start with the M. The M in the merit framework stands for making DEI goals and work actionable, measurable, and evidence-based. So when this work is not concrete, when it's not practical, and when it's not measurable, people have a hard time understanding what is it that we're trying to do and how will we know if we've actually made progress. So these become very important criteria. As we're thinking about evidence for supporting the necessity of valuing DEI work, we can look to evidence that suggests that if we don't do it, there can be problems that can ensue. And so, for example, there's this wonderful article called The Costs of Racial Color Blindness. It's written by Mike Norton and Evan Applebaum. It's a one-page article in Harvard Business Review called The Costs of Racial Color Blindness. And it says, when we lean on this idea that we shouldn't see color, we actually perpetuate biased and biased decision-making. So painting the case, framing and motivating DEI work in terms of what can happen if we don't do it is often really important for helping people to understand why we're doing it and why we should establish concrete, actionable, and measurable goals in order to advance. So let me break that down for you in terms of like what that would look like in practice. And I want to give you some ideas for if you're at the C-suite level or a senior leader, what can you do with respect to this concept? And then if you're a mid-level manager, what can you do? So if you're a CEO, C-suite, or senior leader, if you're trying to I think, support the M in the merit framework, then you want to make sure that you at your level are setting goals focused on desired workplace culture outcomes. So making sure that there are goals around inclusion, engagement, belonging, and so on and so forth. And at the mid-level manager, people who are not deciding necessarily the direction of the strategy, but are charged and have the very difficult task for implementing it, how do you set goals at your team level for inclusion, engagement, and belonging? And how do you help your team members understand the importance of doing the work to achieve those outcomes? The E is elevate DEI work internally and externally. This means giving DEI the appropriate budget and resources in order to actually deliver on all of these ideas, and definitely giving the work and the people doing it the appropriate level of visibility so that we understand that it's important. So for senior leaders and people in the C-suite, this means that the CEO should actually spearhead DEI efforts. Now, this doesn't mean you don't need a diversity leader. It just means that the CEO should be in a position where they actually are sitting right alongside everybody else in constructing the diversity strategy, and ultimately feel that they have ownership for what actually happens at the end of the day. At that level, having an appropriate budget and resources in order to determine how this work is going to be done. There's no magic number. It depends on what the work is. So being able to conduct a market comparison as relative to peers based on size of the organization is really a great step in that direction. At the mid-level management level, what becomes important is, again, for the manager to focus on the team, to develop team-level DEI initiatives, whether that's training, whether that's how do we share our stories about how we're experiencing the current climate, how do we think about how we ideate, how we actually decide upon the work that we're going to do as a team. So inclusion in team-based decision-making and processes becomes a perfect opportunity for elevating DEI work at the middle management level. And then certainly the middle manager is always filling out an annual, if not quarterly, review of the work that their team is doing and that they as the manager of the team are doing, including the DEI work, including the goals, the processes, the outcomes, and the people doing it in that work is especially vital to elevating the caliber of DEI work in the organization. R stands for requiring leaders and managers to participate in behavior-based DEI training. So I'm going to tell you, first and foremost, as an organizational scholar whose work draws both on psychology and sociology, it's very hard to change behavior if people aren't aware of the behaviors that you actually want them to engage in. So I'm not negating that raising awareness is important. I'm just saying the ultimate goal of the training should be to identify a set of behaviors that you want people to engage in, so that when they leave the training, they know, let me just try, even if it's a couple of things, let me focus on that. Or maybe the training is focused around one clear behavior. So if we're focusing on changing behavior, let me sort of help make that concrete for you. At the senior leadership and the CEO level, that means that the CEO should require leaders and managers to attend trainings, not make them optional, right? That there should be a certain set of required managerial trainings that speak to, I would say, the privilege and the honor that leaders have of actually being in that role. So attending a training that focuses on proper behaviors in the hiring practice process is really important. Proper behavior with respect to giving feedback and in the performance management process is important. And effective mentoring and sponsorship behavior is also important. And the list goes on, but I would say that these are three that are immediately, I would say, recognizable to many of us and actionable in a training standpoint, from a training standpoint. With respect to mid-level managers, they should attend these trainings, focus specifically on improving their behavior vis-a-vis their team members. And it's not just enough to teach the manager what he or she or they need to do differently. It's how do you help the manager feel that they can relay that newly developing knowledge and skill set and share that with frontline employees who could also benefit from similar knowledge. So actually paying it forward or passing it along becomes a really important part, I would say, of the carryover of the work that middle managers are doing to improve their capacity to engage effectively in diversity, equity, and inclusion-based outcomes. The I stands for identifying leaders and non-managerial employees willing to serve as DEI sponsors. So we hear words like champions and ambassadors, but all in all, whatever we refer to them as, whatever level we give them, we're trying to get people who don't necessarily have a formal job title with respect to DEI. We're trying to give them status, a title, a champion or ambassador, but we're also trying to use their energy, lean on their energy to help implement DEI goals. I'm going to talk in a minute in the T about making sure that we are rewarding people for this, so that it's not just giving people a second or a third job, but we'll get there in a second. Okay, so senior leaders and CEOs can be champions for DEI work. And usually when we're constructing DEI councils, creating employee resource groups, and allocating executive sponsors to these initiatives, that's a way in which we are actually beginning to distribute the DEI work and I would say elevate its importance in the organization. Also things like having people who are senior leaders participate in formal sponsoring programs, so not just mentoring programs, but sponsoring programs where they're charged with being the advocate formally for a certain group of high potential employees is also an example of this. And finally, with respect to mid-level managers, charging them with helping to implement a role that can be team level, being a team level DEI ambassador, where they help the manager implement DEI practices that are considered important in the organization more broadly. All right, so the T is my favorite part of the framework, because I would say if anything is especially salient over this last year is that there are a lot of people who have been doing a lot of work for their organizations under the auspices of helping to create equity, inclusion, and justice, and they are not being rewarded for it financially or in a visible way as tied to, I would say, systems and practices that matter at the end of the day, meaning that they're doing all this work and it's not being tied to their performance. And that is a missed opportunity, because it is very hard to continue out of the kindness of your heart to give all of this effort and energy to your organization in the service of diversity. And so what it means is that people start to treat diversity work like peripheral work. I call that a side hustle or side work. when you actually want them to treat it as core work, as just like all the other work that they're doing. But if you actually want people to treat DEI work as core work, well, then you need to treat it as core work. People need to have appropriate titles and reporting relationships to reflect the importance of this work. And it does need to be included in performance management systems. So what does that mean for CEOs and senior leaders? That means considering a model in which DEI leaders are not necessarily just reporting to HR or the people leader, that they are reporting to a broader group of executives. And the reason for this is because DEI does not just touch HR and people, it also touches marketing. It also touches the community. It also touches finance. It touches every aspect of the business. And when it only reports to to the HR people leader, that means that the message might only carry that talent type tone. A very important way of constructing DEI, but we want to make sure that we're not limiting the conversation to only one type of expertise or one important level or aspect of the organization, that we're making sure that this very important conversation is relayed in other parts of the organization. So what does that mean for a mid-manager? That means that even if you're not asked, and we're working towards getting organizations to actually make systematic and structured an evaluation of your DEI performance in your performance review, but absent of that, absent of a formal box to check and to elaborate your DEI work, when it says anything else you'd like to report on, how about including your DEI work and your performance on DEI work and the work that you're doing in your team as part of that bucket? I do this every year. I have to have a faculty annual review process, and it says any suggestions for improving the report or what else have you done? I write an entire paragraph about my DEI work and why I think we should have a space for that in the performance evaluation process. So I'll let you know if I'm successful someday in making sure that it's duly noted. Last thing I want to mention before we sort of open it up to more discussion with Michael is that there are two things that I'm not mentioning here today that in my breakout room we can certainly talk about. My breakout room will focus more on the idea of engaging younger and emerging leaders in DEI work, which is the second point. But the first work is we haven't talked about yet, or I haven't talked about with you, intersectional issues, in particular intersectional as women of color, and particularly Black women, bearing the lion's share of invisible DEI work in their organization. That's a deep issue of inequity. And we know this to be the case, and it's coming out more and more in the media today. So we need to do something about that, which means we need to create equity. And then with respect to generational differences, there is this notion that we're having sort of some anecdotal evidence to suggest that people who are younger and coming from the new generations entering the workforce may not have the same motivation to explain their backgrounds, their experiences, where they are coming from relative to people who've been in the workforce longer and who are just used to explaining all of that to people who aren't like them. So this is a novel experience for some of our younger workers because they've had the privilege of being around lots of different people in ways that I think some older workers have not. So we do need to continue to contend with this idea of helping people who are coming into the workforce understand that while it might be different, that they have to sort of take the time to explain their backgrounds and their experiences to people who might not know. It becomes a really important part of the story. So with that, thank you so much for your attention. I'd love to turn it over to Michael.
Hi, Dr. Creary. Thanks so much. For those on the line that I have not met before, I'm Michael Johnson. I'm the head of diversity and inclusion at Abbott, and I just want to say thank you very much for the talk, Dr. Creary. I think it was really fantastic and a lot of really great things to acknowledge and things that kind of come out of that for me. As we start kind of maybe a Q&A session here, I'm going to ask you a few questions that came out of the presentation for me. I would say others, if you have questions, please put them in your chat. They'll come to me and we can kind of go from there. I do want to acknowledge the level of diversity that we just have even on this call, which I think is really, really cool. It was one of the reasons why we founded WILD, right? We wanted to see diversity in leadership so that we could maximize patient outcomes. And I think we see a lot of that here. And I know it's people on the line that want to have an impact. But I do know that, I feel really blessed. I work for a great company, Abbott. My CEO has been extremely supportive of diversity and inclusion. Our board, we report on it regularly, but I know that my structure, me being the head of diversity and inclusion for a large company, this is like a structure that doesn't exist in many companies, right? And we have wonderful people on the line that want to do the right thing. And so I want to focus a little bit on that do area that you talked about, because you mentioned all these different activities, right? And there's so many different things that people can do. What I loved about your talk is, for those of us that are building programs from the very beginning, we have a blueprint, right? But if you're not the one that's in charge and you're thinking about, well, what can I actually do myself as an individual? Out of those many different do's, is there one that you would say you just hone in on as, yeah, I think that's the right one. I think that's the right one.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question that I often get asked by my students, as a matter of fact. So I actually teach diversity, equity, inclusion courses at Wharton. When I started working here 4 years ago, I created the first diversity courses here at Wharton. So I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing in this course or how the students would receive it. And so this is actually the question that first started emerging in my course evaluations, and now forms the structure of how I make sure what the running theme is in my head as I'm creating classes. And that is well, professor, it's all well and good to know that, Abbott is doing all these amazing things at the C-suite, but I'm just like an individual contributor. So what can I do within my own power? So the first thing that I say is, you're not just an individual contributor. You're a very important part of the fabric of your organization, and you need to own that. Because when we talk about our daily lived experience in our organization, yes, you can talk about Abbott broadly, but it's really the interactions that you had with the person on Zoom or down the hall in a pre-COVID world that made or broke your day, right? And so that's why you, as an individual contributor, and what you do on a day-to-day basis matters, because you are affecting someone else's experience, either in a positive way, maybe a neutral way, but also in a potentially negative way. So I would say that as I sort of coach a number of students and teach this course, or as we're speaking to people here who do feel like they don't have structural, hierarchical power, I think it's important about being mindful of the ways in which you are engaging with people in your organization. And one of those is about, who are you talking to on a daily basis? Do you engage with the same 2 people every week, same 3 people? Look at I use a Google Calendar, so I know. And my calendar is packed. So I know who I've talked to this week, and I know sometimes who I haven't talked to this week. So audit your own interactions and interpersonal connections, so that you are actually connecting with more and more people in your organization. The second thing is, in addition to connecting with different types of people, it becomes really important to actually try to get to understand what that person does in your organization. So not just sort of like, how do they feel? How's the weather? How are their kids? Like, that stuff is all great. But what we know to be true is, when people don't feel included, or feel like they belong, or feel like this isn't the place for them, a lot of that is also about, I don't feel like anybody cares about what I'm contributing here. Like, I feel like I'm a reasonably smart person, but people don't seem to care about my ideas and the value that I have. So for you, just being someone who asks somebody about their work and in finding that interesting, that can totally make somebody's day. So I'm just going to sort of stop there for a minute, because I do think it's about interpersonal connection and being really mindful of that, making connection, but also the quality of the connections that you're making with people in terms of asking them about their work, being excited and interested and getting to know what they're passionate about is really important.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Creary. I think there's this conversation that you touched on tangentially, that, there's this balance between behavior and belief, and we're working to change both of them, but just how do you think about that? How do you balance it? How should we balance it as we're going out and trying to manage the changes associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion that we'd all like to see?
Yeah. So I hate to say this, but I don't think it's the same processes. that change belief and that change behavior. And actually, we do know this from science, right? Psychology tells us that you can change. There are certain things that will create behavior change, but they won't create belief change, or certain things that will create belief change that won't create behavior change. And so let's be concrete for a second. Let's talk about this widespread DEI interest. Like, how the heck did that happen, right? And I started to mention it. It created a lot of behavior change. It created a lot of behavior change because people felt something, emotions, right? There was something that felt like a disconnect between the way that they thought the world worked and what they actually saw happening on their televisions and on social media. And so helping to challenge people's understandings of their own experience relative to someone else's becomes really important for changing beliefs. The other part, as I sort of had started with, is this idea of having a profound emotional experience. Now, we can't always replicate that. And the profound emotional experience that many of us had was deeply unexpected, which is why it did lead to that. I would say that that's important again. I think the last part is I'll just give a shout out to my colleague, Adam Grant, who just wrote yet another New York Times bestseller called Think Again, where he takes on this topic of how do you get somebody to change their mind. And so, he's been on this path for helping people to understand that as being a very different process from changing behavior. I can change your behavior in an organization by saying you must do this or else you will get fired, right? I can't change your beliefs on whether or not that's actually something important in the long run.
Well, I think that's a really great point. And I think you touched on, the reason why these efforts and the do has really jumped in is because there's kind of, you didn't say this, but I'm going to say it. There's resurgence of understanding around what's going on, right? This isn't the first time people have kind of come to this place of, man, we need to do something to make this world a little bit more equitable. But what is it that's different now? Why did it take so many people all at the same time moving forward with this? What makes this time unique?
Yeah, so I talk about this as, I question whether this is a surge or a resurgence. I think there's a surge for some people. I honestly think there are lots of people out there, I know because I come into contact with them all the time and have for the last year, who really have just been in a different space than those of us who do DEI work all the time. They're just not aware, right? And so this is sort of like, now that I've heard about this, now that I know it exists, I want to do something about it. So that's one group. Then there's those of us who are aware of it. Some of us are aware of what's been going on, and we've waxed and waned in our engagement. I think some of us are tired, right? And we see that we've been putting in a lot of effort, and progress is slow, and change is hard, and people resist, and it becomes really hard. And so we need, a good swift kick in the form of massive, widespread social inequity in order to keep us motivated to continue. So some of us who actually do the work have experienced a resurgence in our own motivation to continue pressing on. And then some of us who maybe have not been fully engaged, but our corporations have had DEI conversations. We know that DEI is important because there has been some sense of that. We've been able to jump into the conversation in new and different ways because we've recognized that the 4 people, I'm just throwing out a number there, the 4 people who are doing this work are not enough to create change. So to your answer, I'll go back to the question of feeling. It's not just knowledge. Sorry, that's the cognitive space, right? And I think as leaders, and we often operate in this cognitive rational world, but it wasn't rational what led us to do all of this work in the last year and to continue to do it. It was an emotion, and it was also an embodied experience, right? It's this notion of what we felt deep, I think, within ourselves that just felt like we need to be doing something.
Well, it's interesting. And I think we have time for one last question. So I'm going to ask this question. I think it feels intuitive to all of us, but I'd love to just hear your opinion, because what got us here may be emotion, right? the collective emotional experience that so many of us all felt around the world at the same time. But look, we're all working in businesses. Is this a competitive advantage? Are companies that understand diversity, equity, and inclusion, and if I'm the individual contributor that's in the wild meeting and thinking about how I frame this for my interactions, maybe for my leadership team, so that we can continue on this journey, can I say that it's a competitive advantage?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this question in an academic way, because, you know, academics always answer questions based on, like, what does the evidence say, right? What do we have evidence to say? And certainly if you look at academic research, for decades, people have drawn relationships, statistical correlations between diversity, different types of diversity, demographic diversity, but also professional diversity, and performance-related outcomes. And sometimes those performance-related outcomes are financial, sometimes they're more along the lines of productivity, right? So there have been these correlations. And certainly many professional services firms out there in the world have written a number of reports, and they're often produced annually. McKinsey has one that continues to say, in all of our data, we can tie diversity at the top level of the firm to financial outcomes. What I want to suggest is, while we can do that, we need to be mindful of the whys and the hows. So the mechanisms and the explanations, how do we get from diversity to performance? Because it's not magic. And that research makes it sound like it's magic. It's not. It takes all the work. So all the focus on doing and valuing that, Michael, that you and I are talking about today, is the black box. So while I agree that you have to sort of meet people where they are and speak to them in their language if you want to get them on board, which is what this competitive advantage conversation is about, we can't just be spending all of our time trying to prove a business case. We need to be spending more time doing the work and actually creating the structures and the processes so that we can actually get from this sort of amorphous notion of us all being different people to something that's actually helpful to our organizations, and dare I also say it, to society more broadly.
Yeah, you know, it's I think an interesting part of the conversation, because it's important, I think, in many of our companies to know that it can lead to these differentiated outcomes. But quite frankly, we do the work, we start the work, we do the work just because it's the right thing to do. Right? We know it's the right thing to do. And so I would like to say a huge thank you, Dr. Creary. I loved your talk. It was a pleasure for me to have a chance to speak with you. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Katie Spade, DVP US Commercial for Abbott Diabetes Care. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Michael. What phenomenal learning today from Stephanie. And we know there's great learning ahead from Sahar and many other speakers. As Michael highlighted, my name's Katie Spade, and I lead our Abbott Diabetes Care commercial business in the US. And I also partner with Michael on advancing leadership in underrepresented populations, and specifically focusing on advancing women's leadership as the executive sponsor for our Women Leaders of Abbott at Abbott Diabetes Care. So my team and I are also passionate not just about leadership and health equity, but we're also very passionate about bringing equity and improved diabetes care for people living with diabetes in underserved communities as an anchor sponsor of the ADA's Health Equity Now. It's been an incredible journey to be a part of WILD from the start. We are very excited not only about the learning since we began in late 2020 in the midst of this global pandemic, but our learning as a diabetes community. I have to highlight, I've even leveraged content from these meetings for my very own internal meetings. I look back and think to the last keynote from JC Petrovic at Insulet. She highlighted the remarkable speed with which we all moved to work from home so quickly. And as I gave an internal discussion on flexible work arrangements at Abbott, I was able to directly cite her sentiment on how quickly we've all evolved in our own ways of working. I also think back to Martha Goldberg Aronson's discussion on board involvement, and I've reflected on how this discussion could link to my own personal development plan. And I hope that many of you have had your own, same reflections and learnings from many of these events. We've heard from world-class speakers, and we've had fantastic knowledge building and community building among emerging and senior women leaders in about 20 organizations who have joined our 2 events before this one. It's terrific. There's over 25 different organizations represented today and over 400 people who enrolled to join for today's session, which is just incredible. We're excited to come together and to grow. Kelly and her team want leadership in diabetes to have more women and diverse leaders at the board levels, whether it be professional, private, or nonprofit, more than any other area of healthcare. And that's what she wants for patients. And we think we should be definitely up for this challenge. So we at Abbott are excited to be a part of sponsoring and supporting WILD with Novo Nordisk, Insulet, and we'd love to invite many more organizations to join us. At WILD, Kelly and her team know what it takes to build a community and to drive meaningful changes, both for greater diversity in leadership and for better patient outcomes and better system outcomes. So we want and need your voices to be heard as we shape WILD's future offerings. Thank you for the time today to learn about us and how we're trying to create a greater community and advance women's leadership in diabetes. And at this stage, we would love to get more organizations involved so that we can begin to engage even more women leaders and allies in our content. This is just the beginning, and we need your help in reaching your organizations. So please, if you can connect us with your specific leaders in your diversity and inclusion divisions, in human resources, women's groups in your organizations, or just senior leaders within your team, please send a chat to WILD Info in Zoom right now with the contact information of someone we can speak to. Again, that's WILD Info in Zoom. Thank you for helping us broaden our community. We can't wait to speak with you and your leadership team about how your organization can become even more involved in WILD. So thanks so much. And without further ado, I will pass it on to Kelly Close.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie, for those generous words. You've been such a leader to us, and we can't emphasize enough, as Katie just said, how excited we are to grow. Please get in touch with us. She said through chat or wild@closeconcerns.com if you'd like to get your organizations involved. Also, you can hit reply to any closer luck. So today, Sahar, Stephanie, and Michael have all given us thinking that can really impact our work environment. And listening to the professors pushes me to think about ways that we can all take these learnings and translate them even more directly to our lives and work. Because our mission for better patient outcomes, for women's leadership and equity relies on hard work, valuable thought, and focused action. Stephanie encourages us to think actively about widespread social inequity. Want to put in a plug for the Race Equity Institute. I've started to learn a lot there. We're introducing it to our family of organizations here in San Francisco, Close Concerns, DQ&A, the Diatribe Foundation. Lots of you have been thinking about this, doing incredible work, as Stephanie has said, and investing it. You're inventing time for it. And so thank you. I see this. Organizations that understand DEI, as Michael said, it's a competitive advantage. And we really can be aligned in creating messages that really are aligned throughout the field, and in thinking about where we have learned among the most valuable things and how we can create narratives among us in the field. We've heard in the past how many of you want to connect with one another after these events. So we are creating an opt-in contact list of today's attendees. So our team has put a form, put a link in the chat. They're doing that right now. And we're just really grateful to all of you participating today, to our speakers for sharing these really thought-provoking insights and these pieces that make us pause to think about how we can be better leaders, better team members, encourage those around us. So on behalf of the WILD team, thank you all for being here today and wanting to learn and be open to even more changes, whether it's in your own personal career, your team's approach, or the diabetes ecosystem as a whole. And now I'm going to turn it over to Close Concerns' amazing associate, Kiara Wong, who's going to lead us into our breakout sessions.
Such a large part of WILD is developing greater community and connections, and that's exactly what we hope to offer you right now in our skill building and networking breakout rooms. So in just a few minutes, you will be able to choose one of our 4 breakouts, depending on what interests you most. So you could join Dr. Sahar Youssef if you're interested in diving deeper into the ways that we can assess and manage burnout. Dr. Stephanie Creary and Michael Johnson will also be hosting a breakout during which you'll be able to ask more questions and talk about what we can be doing to engage leaders at all levels in diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Dr. Fran Kaufman will be hosting our 3rd breakout room. And in this breakout, you'll have the opportunity to meet one another in a casual setting and discuss the biggest unmet needs in diabetes. As a bit of background, Dr. Kaufman has been a longtime mentor to Kelly. They actually met in the late 1990s, and we are so grateful to her for being with us today. She is the 2nd woman president of the ADA, has 43 years of experience in academic medicine, industry, and research, and she is currently the chief medical officer of Senseonics. The 4th and final diabetes-focused breakout room will be led by Kelly Close and a few associates from our Close Concerns team, Hannah Guto, Katie Mahoney, Ria Tang, and Albert Kai. This session is going to review the latest from recent scientific meetings in diabetes tech and therapy, including digital health, CGM interpretation, and stem cell-based and next-gen incretin therapies. So now for the instructions on how you can actually move into the breakouts that interest you most. So you can click on the breakouts button on your Zoom toolbar, and a window is going to launch that will show you all of our breakout rooms. And then you can take your cursor to the right of the room name that you want to join, and a join button will appear. And you can just click on that button to move yourself into the room. If you're having some trouble with your technology, feel free to just stay in this main room, and our team can manually move you into the breakout of your choice. If you want to let us know which room you want to join, feel free to just type the name or a couple keywords of the topic into the Zoom chat window, and make sure that you're sending that message to everyone in chat so anybody on our team can see that and help you move very quickly. And we're going to be keeping this main meeting room open so that if you're having any questions or you need any help with anything, you can just let us know. And that's all. So right now, you can go ahead and click the breakout button and select the room that you want to attend. So we hope you enjoy.
As Katie said, WILD has been just tremendous for us in Abbott Diabetes Care and Abbott in general. But I got to tell you, this session, all the breakouts are awesome. Dr. Kaufman, Dr. Youssef, and Dr. Creary, I don't know which one I'm going to be able to go to. They're great. Wow. You make it hard. You make it hard, Kelly and Kira.
They're all going to be amazing. And like I said, we're going to be able to share some of the learnings, just some of the very big picture things. And I know everyone is being patient, getting into their rooms. So am I. And thank you thank you very much. These are going to be really valuable. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Fran's room, Dr. Kaufman's room. She's going to be talking to you and listening and just facilitating a discussion about the biggest unmet needs in diabetes. And Fran, I might even open it up to you to say a couple of things if you would like to. But we feel that this really resonate with a lot of the discussion from today. So what do you think, Fran? I'm thinking back to Sacramento when I met you from the late 1990s. So that's what I have in mind. But
sorry, I was still on mute. There's a plethora of unmet needs, and I just think we'll have a pretty open discussion, I hope, going around the room and seeing what everybody has to say and hopefully meeting each other and getting to know more people.
You know where to write, wild@closeconcerns.com, if you would like to do more of this. I salute all of you for the work that you're continuing to do in and around all of diabetes to improve patient outcomes and to improve system outcomes. Thank you very much again, and have a wonderful and safe rest of the week and month as possible. Bye.
So we had kind of conceived for this to, one, maybe have a forum where we could meet each other, and leaving it up to you and perhaps going around these little squares representing each one of us to introduce yourself. If you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to, and maybe say where you work and what your role is, and then what your concept of the unmet need, and maybe a little bit of how we might be able to address that. I think the one thing I've learned, and I love being in these groups. I think I'm always the oldest person there. I used to be the youngest person, but that was a while ago. And there's something phenomenal about having, at least for me, a career in diabetes from the very beginning, and to see all the changes and to meet so many people in so many different phases of my own career, as well as phases of all of your careers. And I think the one thing to me that WILD can offer all of us is maybe some connection. And, I was pretty bold after the last meeting. I contacted a number of people who I had met. We've had some ongoing meetings, and it's been really remarkable to get to meet people who have so much talent, so much passion, and, and really, obviously, the patient focus in mind. So if you would put your name in, Kat and Elaine could call on you, and I'll start. So I am actually a pediatric endocrinologist, and I've been doing this for 43 years, if not a little bit longer. And I think, to me, there's so many unmet needs. And actually, when I started, all we had was animal insulin and urine testing. We've actually addressed a fair number of unmet needs, but there's obviously many more yet to go. But when I look at really some of the barriers with all the advances we've made, and this has been a focus of Kelly's as well, I would say that one of them is the stigmatization of diabetes itself and of people with diabetes. And I think that stigma is pretty, broad ranged. It affects children with type 1. It certainly affects adults with type 2. And it affects the care we give to people. And within the diabetes, ecosystem itself, I think there's differential stigmatization depending on socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, a lot of perceived things. And one of my goals that I'd like to hopefully accomplish at some time, in at least the 20 more years of my career, I hope, is to work with other healthcare providers to help eradicate some of that stigmatization, where we know that even in the type 1 world, that children of color, for example, and we've seen this in the type 1 exchange, don't have insulin pump access as much as others, and the same with CGM. And that just has to be something that I hope we're all committed to work on.
Thank you for choosing this room to continue the conversation. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Michael, who has some things that he wants to sort of share with us to open up our conversation. He's the one who kind of gave me the idea for doing this group. And then I'll lead this in an activity of us introducing ourselves to one another and sharing some thoughts. So Michael, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Michael, really nice to be in a breakout with you. One of the things that I think Stephanie touched on it just briefly is just the difference in the way that I'm finding that people are thinking about diversity and inclusion activities. And, I remember really clearly, I was in a meeting and we were, and it was after George Floyd was murdered, and we had brought some ERG leaders together just to talk a little bit about activities. And one ERG leader said, why don't we do some cultural mentoring? Why don't, maybe I'm a mentor for Michael would be a mentor for Black people. This person could be a mentor about what it's like to be a woman. This person could be a mentor about what it's like to be gay. And that was their idea. That was their perspective. And then it was another member who happened to be about 20 years younger said, I think that's absolutely the worst idea I've ever heard. It's not my job to teach you about me. There's tons of information out there about me. It's your job to learn it. And I thought, wow, that's pretty powerful. And, I think that's a generational thing, but I thought since we have an expert, Stephanie, maybe what do you think? Is this generational? What's going on here?
Yeah, so it's great. And I loved when you brought this up when we initially met, because so while I can't say that there's been a scientific study on this, I can tell you that this seems to be a theme as I am doing research on this topic and interviewing people who are in positions like Michael in different organizations, as they're talking about this divide between how we think about DEI work and in an organization, and thinking that the expectations differ quite clearly, and there seems to be one divide between people of different ages. And I also want to say generations in this point, because I don't think it's just about, well, they're younger, they don't know, and we're older and we've been around longer. This is what I always try to teach my students when I have MBA students who always try to say, well, they're just undergrads, they've never had work experience before. So there's always some conversation, something about being a novice, but what does this mean generationally? Let me sort of like set up the conversation before I then ask you all to, for your own perspectives on this topic, but also engaging emerging and younger, and not necessarily doesn't mean the same people. You could be emerging and not be the youngest person there, but engaging newer, younger, and emerging leaders in this conversation. And so when I talk generationally, what I'm acknowledging here is that this idea of diversity is not something that all of us on this call were immersed in our formative years, right? As children or in our 20s. Some of us did not hear about diversity until we were established in our working careers. So the very notion that we would even be trying to sort of get to know each other across differences, embedding that in the work process, putting it in our performance management system, that there's a competitive advantage, that was not something that was brought to our attention until we were working. For people who are of the younger generations, diversity was a concept from like the day they entered kindergarten, if they're from the US, right? And I'm sort of kind of bounding this to the US for just a minute because our cultural context is quite different from others. And so they've been explaining themselves and their cultural backgrounds like their entire lives, and it hasn't been taboo. So you can understand why being a cultural mentor, once they reach your organization, feels like this again. Why they should have been listening this whole time, because they don't necessarily know that you have not had the experiences and the privilege to listen to all these people narrate their cultural backgrounds in the way that they have. So what I have come to understand, especially when I talk to people who are not, I identify as a Gen Xer, none of my generation, is that they believe that because we are older, we should already know, we should have already had this experience. And they don't necessarily understand the context, which is, diversity is a thing of the late 80s, early 90s, right? Now, I know you weren't born yet, late 80s, early 90s, but we made this up in the late 80s, early 90s. So that's all to say is that I think as we're starting to try to get people engaged in this conversation, whether they're older or younger, we do need to take into context exposure to this topic when they got it. And I would say there needs to be, obviously, I think patience and empathy become two important virtues in this conversation. I always tell my younger students, you need to have some patience and empathy with people who are older, who have not done this as much as you've done this before. So you think that they should just know, they don't always just know, right? And then I think patience and empathy with younger workers who are like, why don't we just have large scale, massive change? Why are we still sharing our stories about how we came to understand George Floyd's murder, right? So there's like we need to acknowledge that is the distance sometimes between us generationally. So with that said, here is my prompt for you all, because I would love to hear your voices now, is I would just love for you to introduce yourselves. What do you do? Like, how do you normally answer that question? But do you have an idea of something that you are doing or would like to do in your organization, a practice or an activity of sorts that is focused on this idea of engaging younger and emerging employees in DEI work? So either something you're actually doing in your own practice or in your organization, structured or unstructured, or what you think people should be doing. And we're just going to do a round robin that way.
This research actually came out just a couple of weeks ago from Stanford. I'm curious, has anyone, feel free to put in the chat if you've heard of the study that just came out. No? Okay. So that I'm even more excited to share it with you all. This is the first ever empirical study on video fatigue, believe it or not, because we've all been experiencing it this year. The 4 causes of video fatigue, and I've actually paired them up with solutions from our lab at UC Berkeley on what you can do to actually address some of these causes. The first is actually excessive and unnatural eye contact. It's a huge part of what's going on inside of the human brain when we're perpetually on these video conferencing calls. There's an area of the human brain called the fusiform face area. They're the FFA for short. It's an area of the human brain completely dedicated to one thing and one thing only, and that is processing human faces. That's it. That's its only job. Now, when we are on these video conferencing calls, even right now, for example, I, as a human being, am motivated, excited, and stimulated to be able to look at your faces. That is what I want to look at when I'm having a conversation. So what I'm doing right now, even right now on this Zoom call, you can see I'm actually looking at, I can see Kira and I can see Lisa. So I'm staring at your faces, and where are your faces while I'm sharing the screen? They're like in this weird corner over here. It is not here where the camera is. So in order for me to make eye contact for you, I have to look away from you. And in order for you to make eye contact, it's completely unnatural. Everything is completely twisted in, unfortunately, the virtual world, at least as we have it now. So what ends up happening, according to some research, again, not only from my lab, but labs, again, not only at Stanford, but across the country and internationally at this point, we're seeing excessive activation of the fusiform face area, because the part of your brain dedicated to processing human faces and the nonverbal cues associated with face processing is going on hyperdrive, because it does not understand why I'm having a conversation with you if I can't look at you directly in the face. How is it that, for example, Kira can chat with me, or I can chat with Karen or Kelly, and we're not looking directly at each other? It's absolutely biologically unnatural, and it's one of the predominant leading factors for this kind of video fatigue. So what can we do about it? Well, the first thing is to actually use speaker view, meaning try not to see yourself and try to see one face at a time, so that at the very least, when it's possible, not when folks are sharing screen, but it's one person is speaking at a time as opposed to the entire gallery all at once. Another thing that you can do to just decrease the amount of stimulation, neural stimulation that's actually going into the video. So for example, if you've got a Zoom thing going on, a Google Meet open, literally taking that window, shrinking it down so it's about a quarter or a third of the screen, and then have the rest of your screen be notes. Have something else up so that you can kind of keep your focus on the content of the meeting, but you're sending the signal to your brain that these people are just like tiny little boxes and it's not a face. So brain, stop worrying. It's like an audio call practically. So they can see you, of course. We can't change how other people are doing their video, but for you all, as leaders, you can change at least your brain's relationship with the video call when you can. The next is constantly staring at ourselves. Constantly staring. That area of the brain, the FFA, gets the most activation when we see our own image. The human brain is nearly incapable of not processing our own reflections. We love seeing ourselves. If anyone's ever, had kids, the moment they can they figure out when they see a mirror, their own reflection, they're completely enamored by it. They're like, whoa, is that me? And then we start moving their faces around. They're like, when I lift my eyebrows, that is lifting its eyebrows. We cannot help but process ourselves. It's just natural biological tendency. And what we end up doing, and I can speak for myself as well, I'm in the same boat. What do we end up doing? We're like worried about how our hair looks, how we're showing up. We're worried about the lighting, the background. I start to notice, like weird blemishes on my face. Honestly, It didn't matter when we were back in the office. I didn't have a pulse check on how I looked when I was, back, on campus running from room to room. It shouldn't matter all that much now. Otherwise, I'm actually setting myself up for a great deal of discomfort once we're back in the office, if and when we go back in. Because now all of a sudden I just get ready in the morning and I'm not looking at myself unless I go to the restroom and I take a peek, while I'm washing my hands. But otherwise it is what it is. Right? So I really encourage everybody, if you're comfortable, it makes such a big difference to hide your self view. So if you use Zoom, the way that you do this, by the way, is you hover over your own image. And then you see the little 3 dots, the ellipses that come up in the upper right-hand corner. You hit the ellipses and there's a button called Hide Self View. When you do that, you no longer exist to yourself. I'm not suggesting that you turn off your video for others. Everyone can see you. It's kind of like real life. I've been saying this to people for the past couple of months and they're like, well, that's weird. They can see me, but I won't be able to see what they're seeing. And I was like, hello, what was it like when we're actually having a real conversation in the real world? People see you, but you don't see yourself. You don't carry a mirror around when we're talking to people. This is good for the brain. It's going to be like back to normal for all of us. And you're going to get less of that brain drain, unnecessarily processing yourself. Now, if you don't use Zoom, we don't have a hide self-view functionality, for example, for Teams, for Skype, or for Google Meet. But what you can do is have a stack of Post-its next to your computer and then take that and then just cover yourself. It's usually you're in the lower right-hand corner. Just take that and cover that area up so that you're not unnecessarily, again, processing your own image during the course of the meeting. The next leading cause of video fatigue is a lack of mobility. It is not natural to feel boxed in, right? And I'm seeing some nodding faces here. Yeah, it is this, we can see the box and it's like we're in the Brady Bunch perpetually. We feel like we can't move outside of the box. I want you all, especially as leaders, push back against this. Get comfortable, lean back. There's no reason for you. This is not a photo shoot. It's a meeting. Lean back, get comfortable, move around. We all know, like, life is not in this box. There's stuff around me. Like I'll like pull out, like I've got my mouse here. Oh, and apparently my mouse works, as you can see. We've got my mouse here. I've got my AirPods. I've got like some books on my desk, but I want you all to get comfortable actually taking up the space in your rooms so that you're sending the signal to your brain that I am not locked into a box. It is not a photo shoot. I'm just in a meeting. So if you just want to turn around and take up a little bit of space, encourage yourself to act like you would when we're back in the office. We bring our laptops and our notes into the meetings, of course, yes, but it's not, we're still comfortable enough to move around. So I want you all to be comfortable to do that. Okay, so the last piece is higher cognitive load interpreting nonverbal cues. Of course, as you all know, the human brain is very good at processing nonverbal cues. That's what makes us really smart and human and social animals. It is not normal to be processing nonverbal cues from multiple people simultaneously. When we were back in the office, I'll use this example here. Let's imagine we're back in the office and Lisa's presenting something, right? So Lisa's presenting something, so I'm mostly staring at Lisa, but in my periphery, of course, I can see some of the other folks. I can see, let's say, Karen or Kelly or Kira, and I'm not really focusing on them because Lisa's the one talking. What are we doing now? Our eyes are darting on everybody. We're trying to read everybody's nonverbal cues as if it's like Batman and we're like in this like at-home theater. It's completely unnatural. And it, again, turns our brain onto hyperdrive. It is not natural. So as much as you can, I think the speaker view is also really helpful for here. Reducing the size of the video is also really helpful, but also embracing the audio only call. Oh my goodness, have I gotten so many messages after I've shared this piece of advice from people all around the world to do audio meetings again. Pick up the phone. And if it's not the phone, because that's not company culture, make it a Zoom meeting, but tell people in the calendar invite for the meetings that you own, especially if it's a one-on-one or a team meeting where you guys are just checking in with each other, where you know each other well. You're not trying to do a lot of influence and persuading. It's not a high, stakes meeting. It's a check-in. Take it on a walk. To do an audio only, even if you're not moving, honestly, you could just be right here. But when people see audio only in the meeting invite, you have no idea how amazing it feels to people, especially our subordinates. They go, oh, okay. And even if I have no plan, I can at least just like slouch. I can just get weird in my own environment for just 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, or an hour, whatever that may look like. But we're giving permission to our teams to say, listen, maybe take this call to the backyard to get some sunlight. Like, you have permission to do that. You're still participating in the call, but if you don't need to share a screen, you don't have to be on video all of the time. So the audio only breaks. Now, I'll come back to this in a moment, but I want to introduce you all to the 3M framework for avoiding burnout. The first thing I want to talk about are macro breaks. So there's 3 different kinds of breaks: macro, meso, and micro breaks for avoiding burnout. Starting with macro breaks, the frequency is monthly. Once a month for a duration of half to ideally a full day. And when I say full day, I mean like you're not checking email at all that day. You told people in advance, like I'm gone. I am a new level of MIA. You cannot reach me. I am in a cave for that day. Once a month, you got to give yourself that day. You have to give yourself that day, not only for creativity, you're going to be surprised what kind of ideas come to your mind, but you need that full 24-hour reset. That is considered a macro break. And it's not the kind of Saturday, because I mean, I can tell you, I'll be the first one to tell you that this is not, my weekends are not fully weekends. I'm doing laundry, I'm cleaning the house, I'm doing this, I'm ordering groceries. Lord knows we have weekends every weekend, but we're not taking them, we're working. When I'm talking about a macro break, I mean a real break. Go to the beach that day, like actually have an intentional activity. You can do it with your loved ones, but maybe sometimes just do it by yourself. Get some babysitters going, like, just take that time for yourself. But it's a full day of no email, no devices, no pressure to check in on anything. This is not a catch-up day, none of that. It's an actual break day. At Headspace, we've actually installed this new every second Friday Mind Day. If you all are familiar with the company Headspace, they're actually a meditation and mindfulness company, which I thought was a little bit ironic when they reached out to me earlier in the pandemic and they were having burnout problems. I was like, really? You guys are helping all the other companies with their burnout problems. But sometimes it's hard to drink your own Kool-Aid. So Mind Day every second Friday. This is not PTO. Every second Friday is a no meeting day where and there's no expectation of response on email or Slack. You can catch up on email and Slack if you like. It's not to say that, but there's no expectation of response. If your work is strategy work, grab a notepad and go outside. If your work is creative, stand in front of your whiteboard and think about it. Leave the house, go somewhere. I know it's harder to do the whole like coffee shop strategy sessions now, but do it wherever you like. A Mind Day is your time as a leader to think creatively, to think strategically, take a step back and give yourself an actual Mind Day, meaning, am I going in the right direction? How are all of the projects doing? And actually giving yourself an opportunity to journal and organize yourself without an expectation to be jumping from one thing to another. Now, another piece, which I think is just a neat thing to be able to share with this group in particular, team burnout. We've been looking into, our labs have been looking into perks. What can we as leaders, what can we as entire organizations be doing for our direct reports and for our employees to help them with burnout? As I mentioned before, I'll be the first to admit, my weekends and my evenings are not breaks. I'm not in Hawaii drinking a Mai Tai. I'm still working. I'm just not in a meeting, right? Right now, after we're done, I mean, I've got a million other things I got to do. I got to get dinner. I'm cooking dinner. I've got this, I've got that. I'm not taking a break. So the best thing that you can do for our employees, even for friends. I mean, when I give a burnout talks to teams and to companies, I'm so taken aback by the fact that people will say to me, they'll say in the chat, they'll put in Q&A, I think my friend is burning out, or I think my sister's burning out, and I don't know how to bring it up with her. I don't know how to start that conversation because I see her just running on all cylinders, never taking a break, and she just hasn't been herself recently. So what can I do? My number one piece of advice, and this isn't just my advice, is backed by research, giving people something that they can use to actually use their off time as off time is the best possible thing you can do. That and talking to them about it and normalizing it. So the risk, the burnout risk assessment that I'll be giving to you all, you can share that maybe with that friend and say, oh, I scored this. What are you scoring? Like, I'm worried about burnout. Are you worried about burnout? And just normalize talking about it, because so many of us are struggling with this currently. Things like, again, paying for a house cleaning, paying for a babysitter, providing food for a week. Amazing case study of an individual that actually lost a family member due to COVID. And instead of sending flowers to their house, this manager sent a lasagna, a hot lasagna. Yeah, I'm saying, so Lisa's clapping at that. Why is that so much better than flowers? I don't have to cook dinner. I have 3 kids running around. I want to be able to grieve. I want to, but I don't have time. I have to put on a strong face and do a bunch of other stuff. Give something back to people that they're going to remember that feels like family. That person, that employee will be loyal to you as a leader. They'll follow you into the sunset. I don't think that's even a saying, but you know what I mean, because they know that they're feeling cared for in that time. Okay. Jumping into meso breaks. Frequency is weekly. Duration is a few hours. Every week, I'd like you all to take just a couple of hours. And I know that people usually tell me they're surprised I don't come on and say every night you should be taking, X number of hours, your weekend, you should stop work at 5 o'clock. I just don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's realistic. And studies show, physiologically speaking, we actually don't need to stop working at 5 o'clock. That's all completely arbitrary. This whole 9 to 5 is just an industrial revolution concept. It's not based in biology. However, physiologically, if we get a few hours every week to completely reset. And again, when I say a few hours, when I'm talking about a break, I'm really saying no phone, no computer, no stimulation. You're like taking a nap in the sun outside. You're actually taking a break. It's not catch up time. When you can, and I'm saying a few hours, like 2, like take an extra long shower. I hide from my own household all the time. It's just like, I need to go. It's like I'm taking an extra long shower and I'll just take my time. And I'm not going to waste water, but I'll just like spend 15 minutes in the bathroom, like extra plucking my eyebrow. Like just take the time for yourselves. Let's just be realistic. This is whatever you can do to just pack in the time, but it's you time. And I don't allow myself, the phone doesn't come into the bathroom with me. Obviously I don't have my laptop in there, but that's few hours when I feel not accessible is everything for your mental health. The point is inaccessibility. People cannot reach me because what do we do? I wake up in the morning and I have my phone and my laptop are pretty much on all day. So I feel like people can reach me all day. I want you all to take control back by being not accessible. Again, monthly, half day to a full day. Every week, you need to be not accessible for a few hours. And I'll get into the micro breaks in just a second, but I wanted to share with you all the study that came out in 2019, so pretty recent, on nature, exposure to nature. Some of you that have heard me speak many times before, I've shared with you all the interesting effect that looking at greenery or looking at nature has on the human brain. So it lowers cortisol, actually. A set of Finnish studies from almost 10 years ago now was able to show that we see a reduction in salivary cortisol within 40 seconds of exposure to nature. And this could be a fake plant, by the way. So your brain needs to believe that it is in fact nature and a plant, and you see a reduction in cortisol. So I absolutely encourage folks to have, plants around, their house, look out the window when you can, etc. Just go outside. 40 seconds is all you need for a reduction in the cortisol. But how much do you need to actually see it impact burnout? Because a slight reduction in cortisol is not going to do it. Not when it comes to burnout. Burnout is it's a serious systemic disease. So in order to mitigate and address burnout, how much is the minimum effective dose? I love this group because you're all generally speaking in the biofields here. So what is the minimum effective dose of nature time that I need every day or every week in order to see the positive benefits? It turns out that minimum effective dose is 20 minutes. There you go. So you don't need to spend hours out in nature every single week going on a 5-hour hike. I mean, yes, of course, if you have the time and you like it, definitely do that. Minimum effective dose, 20 minutes. And I recommend 3 times a week to get the most benefit. Oh, there you go. 20 minutes. There you go. I wanted to give a shout out to a colleague of all of ours over at Abbott, Jonathan Matti. He's a senior sales manager over in Sweden. And he allowed me to share this with all of the folks over here at Wild. He's gotten famous for doing his Friday walk-in talks. That's what he's calling them. So he calls them his Friday walk-in talks. And this is from his LinkedIn, actually. So I blocked out everyone's names for the most part, except for Jonathan's. But he admitted to me a while ago during COVID that he knows the whole, I got to get outside. I got to go out into nature. I got to take a walk. But he's busy. He has kids. He's an exec. He's like, I don't make the time half the time. By the time I'm done with my day, it's dark out, it's cold. I just don't feel like it. The kids are done with school. They're running around. It just feels selfish, honestly. So I'm not making the time. His hack for this was actually encouraging the rest of his team to do it, to force himself to do it, because he, as the leader, was the one leading this walk and talk. It's their weekly sync time. So instead of sitting on the normal Zoom call, he just said, listen, we're going to take this on the road. And he now puts pressure on himself. He needs to go outside because he's scheduling the walk and talk. So it encourages everybody else to do it, which is good for them. And they see him as a really phenomenal leader because he's doing it himself. And then he gets to check that, box for himself at least. And I wanted to point out, not everybody is outside walking. Life happens. It's not forced walk and talk. It is just, if you like to, if it's available to you, let's get outside together. He also wanted me to mention to everyone here that it is -17 degrees in this photograph. So no excuses for bad weather. As they say in Sweden, there is no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. So we can do some learning from the Swedes and just get outside and get some nature together. Okay, diving into micro breaks. The frequency is every day, and we can take a couple of minutes to do this. I wanted to talk about a couple of case study examples. Amazon was really famous for starting meetings in silence, even back in the heyday, before they even expanded to the behemoth they are now. But sitting in silence at the beginning of every single meeting. You all as leaders can be really, it really takes people aback. I've not heard any leader implement what many times is called a mindful minute. That means we start the meeting, let's say at 9 a.m. Everyone gets in, but you don't have to turn your video on quite yet. You just need to enter the meeting and at 9 to be on time, but you have a 60-second timer going. 60 seconds of silence, and it's an opportunity to just close our eyes. You do a little face massage, just do a little bit of a stretch, take a few deep breaths, just be like, oh, okay. It's 60 seconds, but that 60 seconds makes such a big difference to people. It makes such a big difference to people. That silence together, that communal silence, is not only energizing, but it makes us feel connected to each other in a very, very human way. That is honestly lacking these days. Try this out with your teams. At Google, they call it the mindful minute. At Cal, we have a couple of classes that begin with a mindful minute as well. It's just 60 seconds. I promise you're still going to get everything done that you need to get done in your meeting. But taking that time can be so impactful for folks. Now, effective recovery after work has a few different components. The first is psychological detachment. So these are the biggest takeaways for burnout. If you're concerned about burnout, the number one way to address burnout and to get over it if you're already experiencing it is you have to create pockets of time when you are not thinking about work. You must create psychological detachment. Okay? Venting is actually counterproductive. So I guess if people are laughing about this, well, think about it neurologically for a second, right? This again might be counterintuitive, but when you think about it neurologically, I spend the entire day dealing with the stress of my job. It's now the end of my day, and I want to connect with my significant other, with a girlfriend, with this person, with that person. And what do? I'm just rehashing the same dang stress. Don't do that. Your job has already taken away 8+ hours of your day. Don't give them the rest of your day. Venting is actually neurologically counterproductive when it comes to burnout. Now, not to say that if something is upsetting you about your job, you don't talk to your boss about it. That's a different story, right? But I'm saying venting in your personal life. I want you all to take the time for yourselves. So psychological detachment. The job doesn't matter that much. Leave the frustrations behind. And the third is if you can't turn off your mind, if the psychological detachment is difficult, move. Move your body. Move locations. That has been shown, either moving locations, so changing in the environment to shake things up, or moving your body, because it takes up so much neural activation to move your body, especially if you're doing something new. It's not like a run of the mill, the same exact, yoga routine or same exact workout every single day that you have memorized. But if you're doing something different, any activity, take up pottery, start knitting, like do something completely different. But if you do an activity that actually takes attention because it's new and salient to your brain, you can't think about the meeting that pissed you off earlier that day. You can't think about the avalanche of emails that's waiting for you in your inbox. The avalanche will be there tomorrow. Take time every single day to psychologically detach for a couple of hours every day. Okay. So those are my big takeaways. And the easy win, the last thing I'll leave you on, is actually leaving devices outside the bedroom. If you all haven't, for those of you who have heard me talk before, this is not going to come as a surprise, but this is a small, easy hack. And I don't want to hear I use it as an alarm. I will personally buy you an alarm. Send me your address and an alarm will show up from Amazon at your door. Okay. We can all buy an alarm. And I don't want to hear I'm charging it and it's close to my bed on my nightside. You don't need it. Leave it outside. If you're afraid that you're going to get an emergency call because you're a caretaker, that's fine. Leave it on loud so that it's within earshot, but put it far enough away or right outside the room charging so that you can hear it if it does ring and it's on loud and an emergency call comes through. Only an emergency call, by the way. You shouldn't have it on loud perpetually, like while you're sleeping. But leaving devices outside the bedroom so that at least you're keeping your bedroom as a kind of a sacred space where work doesn't follow you in there. So if you need to escape to your bedroom throughout the course of the day to just decompress, you can actually do that. Because if we kind of taint our bedrooms with stress from work, there's nowhere for us to hide anymore. You're dealing with it all day, and then you go to your bedroom and it's still there. It's just following you around, just hovering like a shadow. Okay. So, all right, for this, I'm going to actually, hold on one second. I'm going to stop share because I think we have now, give me one moment to refresh this, because I believe now we've got one, and feel free to throw questions in the Q&A while I'm refreshing this. Here we go. Throw this in for everybody. Okay, here we go. So the burnout risk index is actually at this bit.ly link here. So here, let me actually put the link in just on its own. So let's see here. So go ahead, and apparently we don't have enough time because this breakout rooms are closing, but I want you all to take this burnout index. Feel free to share it with loved ones. And if you have questions about this, please do share them with me. And I'm happy to send out some more follow-up resources after this.
We thought a really cool question just to start out with, and we'll go around and introduce ourselves. We thought it would be great to have our associates, who I think many of you know, our associates go to about 40 conferences a year at Close Concerns collectively. It's been a very different year of going to conferences, but we thought that we would be able to start off. I'm going to put everybody in a look at everyone in gallery and put people's names in, and we first will find out a little bit about people who are here, and then we have asked Ria Tang, who runs the therapy group here, and Hannah Chow and Katie Mahoney, who make up the tech team with Albert Kai. They're going to tell you just a little bit about their impressions from having been in and around conferences lately, and some of the thinking that has led to. So I think we'll start. We'll just start at the left from the top. Hannah, Daryl, Katie, and Ria, you guys can start us off. And I think Albert could go right after Ria, and you guys could say a little bit about your backgrounds, what you've studied, where you're from, where you went to school, and then we'll go on to Amanda and Tim and Christine, and I'll put everyone's names in the chat, and then we'll circle back to Ria will go first, and then Hannah, and then Katie. And again, your question for the discussion, if everyone might say a little bit about what they're excited to learn this spring at scientific conferences, whether or not you'll be going to any virtually or participating in any or reading, reviewing them. Take it away, Hannah.
Yeah, so hi everyone, welcome to our breakout room today. So my name's Hannah. I am one of our associates at Close Concerns. I work on the technology team with Katie and Albert, so covering all aspects of diabetes technology. And unfortunately, because I've only been at Close Concerns for a little under a year, I haven't actually been able to attend any in-person conferences yet. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I hope that it will start up again, and especially that we'll just be able to go and get a lot of great learning.
Hi everyone, my name is Gerald. I am a second-year student at Dartmouth College, and I am one of the Dartmouth Fellows at Close Concerns this term. I'm actually nearing the end of my time there, but I've had the chance to go to a lot of different conferences, and I've also been working on planning Wild for everyone. So yeah, I'm really excited to see, to hear what gets discussed today.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie. I'm on the diabetes technology team at Close Concerns with Hannah and Albert. And like Hannah, I have only been working virtually, so I have never gone to an in-person conference. And I'm looking forward to when that can start again.
Hi everyone, I'm Ria. I lead the diabetes therapy team. I was lucky enough to get 1 year of in-person conferences, but I studied bio at Yale, and if you see articles about diabetes drugs or cell therapies, that's usually our team, but nice to meet all of you.
Cool. My name's Albert. Feel mildly left out because I wasn't given the purple background memo, but I lead the tech team at Close Concerns. Joined at the same time as Ria after I graduated from Michigan with a degree in engineering. And yeah, I think my last in-person conference was ATDT 2020. So it's been over a year.
I wanted to just say though, you guys, like this team is so committed, and there's some other people from our Close Concerns as well. The full-time team is 7 people, and they even went during EASD. Yeah, during EASD. Some of them even went to live, for 5 days in Croatia. That was the one place that they could fly into, so that we would actually be on schedule and reporting live. So I know everybody here who receives Closer Look knows how incredibly lucky I am. This is the 15th year of the associate program here. And so maybe what we can do is go back to Amanda. I think I got everybody's names, but we'll start with you. And if you say briefly your name, maybe people can put into chat. Some of you have already done this where you work. We're going to try to do these briefly so that we can get back to the team and they can all give you a couple minutes of their reflections. But it's so nice to see so many of you here.